Only God could rescue me. Only God could set me free. Only God. Only God. Only God. Hello, welcome to Only God Rescued Me. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Lisa Meister, your host, and today I'm going to bring you another survivor story. We have with us Anita Anderson. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be here.
Really glad to have you. We were talking the other day, and I was so excited when you agreed to come on the show.
My pleasure.
I have also a book that you have written, and it's called Turn Around My Child by Anita Anderson. You can find it on Amazon, but you have to put in the title and your name to be able to find it. I highly recommend it. I've been reading it. You've gone through quite a life. Not easy in any way.
But good.
How
Everything that I've gone through, I believe, is for a purpose, and that somehow, some way, whether I see it or not, good will come from it.
There's a scripture that goes along with that, isn't there?
All things work together for good, or God works all things together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, Romans 8:28.
It's a good one to remember because I think we get so inundated with all the damage that gets done to us in ritual abuse that I think it's really good to remember that God can turn all things to good. And your book is so good at pointing that out because chapter after chapter through your story, which is fascinating. I just found the whole thing fascinating. You get hit with so much in your life coming from all different directions. But at the end of each chapter, you show how God is using this in your life and turning things around to good and the miracles that are happening for you. And it's just beautifully done. It's just a beautifully done book.
Thank you. I would like to make a note to the audience that there is no reference to satanic ritual abuse in the book. So if that would be something that would be disturbing for them or troublesome, they will not find anything like that in the book because it was written for my grandchildren and I didn't want to give them that as a gift.
Yeah, not a great gift for sure,
No.
but still a great book. A
Thank you.
book.
Thank you so much.
So even without that piece, still a very difficult life, which survivors tend to have. We tend to get hit by a lot of other things, and we tend to have very difficult lives. So your book points that out very well.
Thank you.
So what was life like for you growing up?
That's kind of hard for me to say because I don't really remember my life growing up from birth to 15, 16 years old. I have maybe a handful of snapshot memories, no continuous consecutive memory at all. And most of my life, I thought that was normal. I thought people just didn't remember much. And the people who did recount something from their childhood usually only had a snippet. They remembered going fishing or they remembered going skating or something. So I didn't realize that it was different or unusual not to have memory. But I have been dissociative probably since infancy at some point. And because I'm dissociative, I have significant memory problems even to this day. As I switch, different parts hold different memories. So I can tell you that I've done a lot of research since I found out that I was different, that I was dissociative. I started trying to figure out why. And I've done a lot of studying. I've been in therapy for many years, and I've learned a great deal about why I am the way I am. And I'm grateful at this point. I think God has given me a wonderful gift in giving me the ability to have parts that hold the really awful stuff so that I don't have to face it every day. Because if I had to face it every day, I don't think I could have had a life. I don't think I could have been married for almost 50 years now and had a career and gotten a couple degrees and raised a son and had some grandkids and I don't think that would have been possible if I was facing the gruesome truth of what I lived through every day.
Almost 50 years. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's exciting. So, how did the memories start for you then?
The memory started, I guess I have to go back a little bit. In 1963, I graduated high school and I thought I was a virgin at that point, which was an illusion, but that's what I thought. And in December of that year, I was date raped. And my father was a military man. I believe a narcissist. I believe he was also dissociative. He was a very stern, sometimes cruel person. And he had said that if anybody ever touched us, he would kill them. And I firmly believe that based on the brutality that I had seen from him. And so when I got date raped, I don't know why, but I knew I was pregnant immediately. I didn't tell my parents because I felt that if I told them that I had been raped, my dad would kill the boy that raped me and he would go to jail, and then my mother wouldn't have a husband and my sister and brother wouldn't have a father, and it would be all my fault. So I didn't tell him until I was about 5 months pregnant. And at that point, he yelled at me until about 5 o'clock in the morning and told me to take my bastard and go to bed. And the next day or two, he drove me down to Catholic Charities in Cleveland, Ohio, and dropped me off and said, don't ever come back.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah. So I had I had my son through that program, decided that I would keep him, mostly because my father didn't want me to, and it was an opportunity to defy him, I think. And it may not have been the best decision in the long run because I was a kid who didn't know anything about how to parent a child. But I did keep him because I wanted him to know that I loved him. And I didn't want him to wonder why his mother gave him away someday. So I kept him. So as a result of that date rape, I was out on my own and I did every menial labor job known to man. And then in 1972, the military opened up to females with dependents as part of the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. And I had been nervous, anxious that if I got sick or injured somehow, my son and I would wind up on welfare. And if you wound up on welfare back in 1972 in Cleveland, Ohio, you were going to remain on welfare for the rest of your life because there were no programs to educate or to get you a job or to provide a babysitter or any of that. So when the military opened up to females with dependents, I joined the United States Air Force. And financially, that was a really smart move for me. About the third year I was in the Air Force, I was stationed at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And a man broke into my home in the middle of the night on a Sunday morning. My 11-year-old son was asleep on the couch, and I woke up to him going through my jewelry box in my bedroom. And I said, what are you doing? And he came over and put his hands around my neck and told me that if I made any noise, he would kill me. And then he also said that if I made any noise, he would wake up my son and make him watch, and then he would kill both of us. I don't know that killing me was ever something that I really was afraid of, but I was very much afraid that if he woke up my son and made him watch, number one, I somehow knew the trauma that that would cause my son, but I was also very much afraid that at 11, my son would try to protect me. And if he did, he might seriously be killed. So um, I just laid there until it was over. When it was over and he finally left, which took a little while, I called the rape crisis line and I said, I've just been raped and I don't know what to do. And it was like 3:30 in the morning. And whoever answered was new. And she said, well, we can't tell you what to do. And she was following directions because legally she can't tell me what to do. But she worded it very poorly, probably because it was 3:30 in the morning and she wasn't awake yet. But it upset me a great deal to be calling the rape crisis line and get the answer, I can't tell you what to do, because that's what I needed to know. So I just hung up on her and I called the police department. And I remember being very afraid that they would come with their lights and sirens and he said he would come back and kill me if I told anybody. And I knew he knew where I lived because he had broken into my house. So I was afraid if he saw the cops come that I would be in jeopardy or my son would be in jeopardy. So they came silently. And when they found out that I was in the military, they told me to go to the base. And so I went to the base hospital, and that's where my rape kit was done. I was greeted by my first sergeant, who was a man, my commanding officer, who was a man. Both of them were so embarrassed and felt so awkward, they couldn't even look at me. When I was being examined, they brought in a kid from the base newspaper to take pictures of me naked for evidence. And he was so embarrassed and felt so awkward, but that's the way they did it back then. So they caught the guy that did it, and we did a lineup, and I identified him, and he was put in jail facing a mandatory death sentence for aggravated rape. And it turned out that I lived 2 doors away from his brother, who was a police officer on the base who had a gun. So a couple days later, the Air Force calls me and tells me my life is in danger and I need to be relocated. And they asked me where I wanted to go. And I said I wanted to go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base because that was in Ohio and that's where I was from and that's where my family was. And the next day I had orders to go to Riverside, California. Oh, I came to Riverside. I was here about a year when I got called into my commanding officer's office, and he said, I suppose you know why you're here. And I thought it was for financial reasons because the cost of living from Louisiana to California had more than doubled and my salary hadn't doubled. And so I was behind on my bills and I was struggling. And I thought he was going to tell me I was in trouble because in the military, if you don't pay your bill, you can be punished. And so I thought that's what it was about. And I lied and said, no, I don't really know why I'm here, and he slid a subpoena across for me to go back for the jury trial for the rape. And if I didn't go back, then the man that raped me got off scot-free because I was the only witness to the rape. And it was the state of Louisiana versus this man. And I was the only witness for the state. So I had a real tough time. I had to spend a couple days in the mental health unit trying to figure out what I was going to do with this. And I decided to go back. And when I showed up for the jury trial, he plea bargained and accepted a guilty plea of simple rape. Simple rape only carries 5 to 10 years in Louisiana. Eventually, he was sentenced to 15 years because he was on parole from New York State. So he did go to prison. But due to that rape, I had experienced trauma and I was having trouble sleeping at night. I was having nightmares. I was really nervous around Black men because this man happened to be a Black man. So I was struggling to function at work. Things were hard. So I went into therapy. And when I went into therapy for that rape, very soon I started getting memories. So that's a long story, but that's how it happened. And so it was actually from that rape that my memories started to surface in the therapy.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they say it often happens that way, that going to therapy for something else kind of kicks it off.
So, how long was the therapy after the rape where the memories started?
Well, I went into therapy. The rape occurred in 1975, and I went into therapy probably around 1976 because I got married in August of 76, and the rape was affecting my sex life with my husband. So,
Okay.
um,
Wow. So, all at the same time.
so I went into therapy for that reason originally, and I'm still in therapy.
Yeah. 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 We should certainly. So, were you able to validate your memories as they were coming out?
Um, the beginning, I always knew there was something wrong with me. I had always been, quote, emotionally unstable. And my father probably asked me every day, what the hell's the matter with you? Don't you have a brain? Can't you do the simplest thing? So I spent a lot of time, even as a child, trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I wasn't good enough, why I wasn't a good kid, why I didn't make my parents happy. So I knew something was wrong. And when I went into therapy for the rape, the first memory I got that was not related to the rape was being in a bathroom when I was 3 years old and being forced to perform oral sex on someone. And I was horrified. And I had the emotional memory with just a knowing that this is what occurred. I could see the bathroom, but I couldn't see the person. And my therapist kept asking me to look at the face and see who it was. I never did see the face, but somewhere in my mind, a voice screamed, "Grandpa, Grandpa, Grandpa." And so my father's father was an alcoholic who was not in the picture at the time, but my mother's father was in the picture at the time. And so I believe at this point it was my mother's father. And I actually thought at that point, there's my problem. Now I can fix it. I'm going to be all better. And then it was a little while longer and I started getting more memories. My parents moved from Ohio to 2 miles away from my house in 1989. And at that point, I just completely fell apart with the dissociative identity disorder. I was switching, I was losing time, I was hiding under my desk, and my secretary had to cancel my meetings for the day because I wouldn't come out. I just became a basket case, and I wound up having to quit my job, which was a really wonderful, high paying job. And I have not been able to work since.
What year was this?
That was 1991 was the last year I worked.
So up until that point, you thought it was just grandpa?
I thought it was just grandpa. And then when my parents moved out, I started getting some other memories. When I had the grandpa memory, my therapist was doing a theophostic type of therapy where she would invite Jesus into the memory to heal the memory. And when she tried to have Jesus come into the memory of my grandpa to hold me and comfort me, she said, "Just let Jesus hold you in his arms." And I screamed, got hysterical, and ran out of her office. So at that point, she started pursuing SRA because it was highly unusual for somebody with a normal upbringing to react so strongly to the name of Jesus. And I could not tolerate the name of Jesus. I couldn't handle it at all. So shortly thereafter, I got a memory of a man dressed up like Jesus, and I was little and I was laying on it may have been a kitchen cart. It was a white enamel, cold metal, had wheels, and it was chipped in some places and it had black underneath the white enamel. And I was laying on my back on this cold table and there was a man dressed up like Jesus that was raping me and saying, "Jesus loves you with every thrust."
Oh,
So that kind of told us that there was probably some SRA lurking in there.
yeah.
And gradually over time, as the memories came, it became more sophisticated, more complex. Today, I believe that I was involved in a multi-generational cult situation. My father came from a long line of Masons and Ku Klux Klan people, and my mother came from a strict Catholic family. Her father was very supportive of the Jesuit order of priest, and the Jesuits have been identified as a group of people that are sometimes involved in satanic ritual abuse. So my mother and father both came from very sick, dysfunctional families, and it's my belief that they were both dissociative. And I think that my abuse started very early. I had one of my parts like to tell stories to tell me information. So one of my parts wrote a story that told me about my birth. And it was very surprising because it wasn't something that I consciously knew. And it's obviously a little part because it's got run on sentences and the grammar is not the greatest, but it's incredibly insightful and very helpful to me. So it's not too terribly long if you would like me to read it,
I'd love to
although
hear
I
it.
may switch when I read it because I sometimes go back to being that part. So I think this is a little boy that wrote this. I have little boy parts and girl parts. Once upon a time, there was a very hurt little boy who had a very sick mommy and daddy. They weren't sick in the usual way. His mommy was sick in her mind. And when he was born, she wanted a little girl. So she dressed him as a little girl and called him by a little girl's name until he grew up and went to school. And then the school made her stop. But then she did other mean things to him. His daddy was an alcoholic. His mommy and daddy hated each other, and they got in lots of fights. And when they would be fighting, his mommy would call the little boy and tell him to protect her. And so his dad would beat him up too. When he was 11 years old, his mommy had another baby boy, but this time she loved the baby very much, which made the little boy feel very bad, like there was something very wrong with him. And so he tried very hard to be perfect so that his mom would love him too, but it never worked. After the little boy grew up, he married a lady who came from a sick house too. And they loved each other very much, but they also had lots of fights because they didn't know anything about how to love because nobody ever showed them. So the man still thought he was no good, and he worked very hard to make everything perfect and demanded to control everything and demanded his wife to be perfect too. And the woman worked very hard to make the man happy because she thought that was her job. And she had promised herself with a very big promise that she would never be mean to her husband like her mommy was mean to her daddy. So she did everything the man told her to do, and she learned to never have any idea of her own because it might be different from the man's idea. And then the man would think his idea must be wrong, and he would get very, very angry, and he would yell and scream and sometimes threaten to kill himself if somebody made him feel not perfect. So the woman learned that the most important thing was to always make the man feel perfect. So she always told him he was right, no matter what. Then one day they had a baby girl, and they both wanted the baby girl very much. And when they first saw her, they loved her very much. But then, very soon after she was born, the man found out she wasn't perfect. So he started asking the woman what was wrong with the baby, that she cried or something. But the woman didn't know, and she would try to make the baby not cry, but the baby still cried. And the man got very mad at the woman for not making the baby stop crying. Because when the baby cried, it meant that the man was not a good daddy, and he couldn't stand that idea. So he would yell at the woman and call her names because she couldn't make the baby stop crying. And the woman felt very sad and hurt because she wasn't making her husband happy like she promised. And she would try harder to make the baby stop crying, but she couldn't. And then she got very angry at the baby for causing all this trouble and making her husband yell at her. And that's how the baby's whole life went. She was never perfect. So her daddy was always angry and asking everybody what was wrong with her. And he kept demanding that she be perfect. And he kept punishing her more and more, trying to make her perfect. But it never worked. And the little girl believed something was really wrong with her because she could never be perfect like her daddy was. Because her daddy always said he was perfect, and her mommy always agreed that her daddy was perfect. So the little girl kept trying harder, but it never worked. So even when she was still very, very little, she started to get angry. She was mostly angry at herself for not being perfect, but she was also angry with her daddy for because he kept demanding her to be perfect. And she was angry at her mommy for always saying that her daddy was right. And she was mad at him for being perfect. And she was mad at God for making her with something wrong with her that she couldn't be perfect. And she wished with all her heart that she hadn't been born at all because she made her daddy so angry and her mommy so sad, but she didn't know how to die. So she just tried harder and harder and got angrier and angrier and kept wanting to die more and more. And when she finally got older, she thought maybe she could die. But when she tried, she wasn't perfect at that either.
Wow. Wow.
Sorry, give me a minute.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure exactly who it is in me that had that story. I'm very grateful because contains so much wonderful, truthful information.
Yeah. What a clear view. What a clear view.
Yeah, and it's very true. It's very, very accurate. And
Yeah.
I did think when I got older that I could die. I had my first suicide attempt when I was 15, and I took arsenic out of the chemistry lab at school. But the good Lord saw fit to give me a part of myself that is determined to save me no matter what. So if I tried to kill myself, that part would come out and take over and call the authorities or call 911 or do something to save me. So after half a dozen suicide attempts, I quit trying because I knew that it was always going to get ruined, never be successful anyway.
Where do
So
you think the information came about your father's need to be perfect?
I think that's probably insight that the part had based on the fact that we studied so much psychology in trying to figure out what was wrong with us, that part of me recognized what was wrong with my father and my mother and pieced together based on what they told us and what our living experience was like. They were able to come up with what I believe is a very accurate and truthful picture of my parents' emotional states, at least at the time that I was a child.
Have you been able to extricate yourself from their toxic mess in your healing process to look at yourself without their perfection? Because I had the same.
Boy, I think I have at this point, by the grace of God, but it's taken years to get to this point. I hated myself for what seems like forever and wished I was dead and thought everything was my fault. I mean, if somebody got elected president, it was my fault. If the moon fell out of the sky, it was my fault. So I did not like myself at all. And I still don't think I can say I love myself. Somehow that just doesn't yet ring true for me. But I can say that I like many things about myself today. I view myself as a warrior. That's the title that I like. A warrior in the battle against good and evil. God and Satan. And I kind of view myself as having been a POW for a while. So I was a prisoner of war when I was a child, and I wasn't allowed to control my own behavior or my own emotions or anything about my life. But God set me free, and I'm no longer a POW, and I have a great desire to be a mighty warrior in his army and to do great damage to the enemy.
Wonderful. Such a powerful writing. So
Yeah.
going back, how did the false memory syndrome hurt your healing process?
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So 1989, the psychiatric community was just coming to terms with multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder. And a great many, I don't know exactly how much, but I would guess at least half or more of the psychiatric community as a whole did not believe in multiple personality disorder, or they thought it was extremely rare. And if a therapist saw one case in her lifetime, it would be amazing. So I don't agree with that. I don't think most therapists today would agree with that because it's extremely common. It's epidemic out there. But back then, they didn't believe in it. When some of the first people who had multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder started revealing the memories that they were getting from their parts, the people who had done the damage became very nervous about being exposed, about being prosecuted, about having their world collapse. And they banded together and formed an organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And it was designed to totally discredit all survivors of ritualistic abuse. And it did so by saying that these weren't real memories. Either the children made them up when they were little, or a therapist planted them in their therapy sessions with the adult. They said that there's no way an adult could go back and suddenly remember things from their childhood that they had forgotten their whole lives. So that if they had forgotten it their whole lives, it never happened. It did not exist. And that there was some other reason that they were now making this up. Perhaps they had lost their sanity. Perhaps the therapist had implanted this and told them it was a memory. So unfortunately, I had my very first therapist was spirit-filled Christian therapist, just kind of starting out in her own therapy office. She was building her own practice. I think her heart was definitely in the right place, but she was also being influenced by people in her profession that didn't support satanic ritual abuse. So she believed in it, but she also felt like she had to protect herself, to protect her practice from accusations or from being discredited. So when I got a memory, she always told me that it may not be a real memory.
Wow.
That part may have just made it up, or it might be a pretend memory. But if they thought it was a memory, we had to help them heal from it. So don't worry about what the memory is, because the memory is not really that important. What's important is that we healed the part. The part has to come to know Jesus, and the part has to be saved, and the part has to have deliverance. If we do that, then we don't have to worry about the memories. So what wound up happening, and I was in therapy not just with her, but with two other Christian therapists over a period of 7.5 years. And this was intensive therapy where there were times I was in therapy 5 days a week, 3 to 7 hours a day. And I was inpatient in Fred Gross Psychiatric Hospital 30 days every year. That's what my insurance would cover. So all of this time we were looking for parts, and with the parts comes memories, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's just the way it works. But every time I got a memory, I was told that I can't put too much faith in that memory. So after 7.5 years, I was not getting any better. I was not improving. I was pretty dysfunctional. I understood now why I was the way I was. I firmly believed I was multiple and dissociative. And now my life made sense. So many things that I couldn't figure out before, like why I had no memory and why I would get these thoughts in my head. And I was getting body memories, but all of my memories came back separate. To have a memory, you have to have the emotional component, you have to have the cognition of what happened, and you have to have some sensations, some physiological sensations, and then it's a memory. So if you remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you remember what it tasted like, you remembered who was in the room, what was their music playing, how did the toast smell when you popped it out of the toaster, how did it sound when you put the butter on the bread. You get all of this together, and that's a memory. And you can say, well, I know I had breakfast this morning, and I know that I had toast and I had eggs and I had, because you have all these components. When trauma occurs, at least my trauma, it gets separated, it gets pulled apart. So the emotional part is held over here in a part of my brain, and it's there, but it's not connected anymore to the cognition necessarily. So the cognition is there also. Nothing is ever forgotten or lost completely. And then there's the part that happened to the body, and that's separate and over here. So when I get a memory back, I either get the emotion like I did when I read the story. When I read the story, I got the emotion of how that part felt about this writing. So I started to cry because it was very depressing and sad. But I didn't have any cognition until that part wrote the story. I would just get the emotion. So sometimes I get cognition, and it feels like maybe a little mini movie playing in my brain. And it's usually only a few seconds long. And it's usually pretty gross and graphic. And I would reprimand myself and say, why are you thinking that? You're a Christian. You're a good person. You're not supposed to be thinking these terrible thoughts. Where are they coming from? And I was careful not to read things or watch scary movies or do anything that would bring them up. But they kept happening. But they didn't feel like a memory because it was just information. I didn't have the emotion. I didn't have the body part. I just had the information. So when it comes back all fragmented like that, it's disconnected and it's really hard to relate to it as a memory. But I'm convinced at this point in my life that the things that came back to me, whether they were just emotion or just a body memory or just cognition, were all valid and predominantly accurate. I'm not going to say completely accurate because I think we do have some faulty thinking that gets messed up sometimes. But there's a reason that I held on to that information. There's a reason God's giving it back to me at this time. And I think when I get that back, I need to accept it and look at it and ask God what he wants to do with this. And I'm with you. I think only God can heal me. I don't think a therapist is going to heal me. When I ask God to tell me what he wants me to know about this memory, this feeling, or this cognition, or this body memory. Sometimes I get bruises on my body, or I get marks where I've been whipped. It welts all over my back. I get pains in my body. The whole left side of my face for a long time just hurt like somebody hit me with a board. It just hurt. And so when I get these now, I ask God to tell me what it is he wants me to know about these. What is it he wants? I don't want to get any memories that aren't accurate, that aren't truthful. I'm a fanatic for truth. I feel like I've been lied to by the very best, and I want to make sure that I don't get lied to anymore. So I'm very careful with what I accept and what I believe to be true.
Yeah,
But
I think a lot of survivors are exactly that way.
yeah.
You know, and we work hard to validate the memories we get. You know,
Uh-huh.
we're trying to figure out how old we are, we're trying to figure out where was this place, or you know, what house was I in? How could this have been
Yes.
true? And looking at every little piece trying to make sure it lines up.
Yeah, and you don't want to accept it. You don't want to
Right.
believe it.
Right.
It seems preposterous. It seems impossible because
Right.
it's so extreme.
Right.
It's so much worse than anything you could have imagined.
Right.
Yeah, it's very different. I was very fortunate in having some wonderful collaboration for my memories from my siblings. When in 1991, I got notified by the Cleveland Police Department that I had been a victim of sexual abuse by a priest, where I went to elementary school from fourth grade to eighth grade. And there was a group of women that were suing the Diocese of Cleveland because Father Carl Wernett of St. Joseph Parish in Avon Lake had been molesting girls who attended the school for over 30 years. And he had since died, but adult women were getting memories of abuse from Father Wernett. And neither my sister nor I could remember anything about the school. We couldn't picture it in our mind. And between fourth grade and eighth grade, I'm old enough that I should be able to remember what the school was like that I was attending, but I couldn't. So I tried to remember the house where we lived, and I could picture the outside of the house. But once I got inside the house, everything got really blurry, and I couldn't remember the inside of the house. So I called my sister and I asked her if she remembered the inside of the house, and she said, yeah. And I said, okay, great. It was a two-story house. I said, go across the living room and walk up the stairs to the second floor and tell me what you see, because I couldn't see anything. And so she waits for a few minutes, and I said, are you doing it? And she said, yeah. And I said, what do you see? She said, nothing. I said, what do you mean nothing? She said, I get halfway up the stairs and everything disappears. So at that point, I decided I was going to go back to Avon Lake, Ohio, and look at the school as an adult with my husband and look at the house if the people would let me. And the lady that lived there currently was very nice, and she let me come in and look at the whole house. And so I did that. And when I was back there looking at the house, I decided that my sister and I, my sister's a Christian, we each had pieces of this, like you described, puzzle. It's like a 5,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, and somebody's just dumped it out on the table, and half the pieces or more are upside down and they're all mixed up. And so, as a survivor, what I'm trying to do is sort the pieces and figure out where the edge pieces are and turn over all the pieces. And I want to put this puzzle together because it's my life. This is my life. This is what happened to me. This is why I am the way I am and why I did what I did. And I have no idea what it is. So I thought, well, if my sister and I can get together, she's got some pieces, I've got different pieces. We can put our pieces together and we can maybe make a little more sense out of this. So we went to get together. And the day we were going to get together, we had a big fight and we almost did not get together at all. I almost left. So Satan was working his magic to keep this conversation from ever happening. But we were both strong enough Christians that we both individually prayed about it and believed that God wanted us to get together. So we asked each other for forgiveness and we decided to get together. And we met at her house and we were talking about weird things that happened when we were growing up and what my parents were like growing up and things that happened, beatings that we got, anything we could remember that might indicate there was trauma or abuse or something going on. And in therapy, actually a couple years earlier, my therapist had asked me to draw a picture of a little girl getting ready to go to a ritual. And it was when I first was finding out that I was SRA. And so I sketched this picture out and just real rough sketch, but it meant nothing to me. It's like, okay, here it is, nothing. Well, I got the idea when I was with my sister to sketch it for her and see if it meant anything to her. So I took a brown garbage bag, grocery bag, and I sketched it on the grocery bag just as it is there. No faces, no, just very basic sketch. And I said, my therapist asked me to draw this, and it doesn't mean anything to me at all. Does it mean anything to you? And I gave it to her, and she looked at it, and she looked at it for a long time, a full minute or two. And at that point, she started to scream and cry. And she said, oh my God, that's our house. That's our house. They did it in our house. They hurt us. They hurt us. And she threw herself on the floor and she was screaming and crying hysterically. And I was floored. I had no idea what to do. So I went down on the floor with her. I held her. I was praying. All of a sudden, she stopped crying and she said, I've got to go to work. I need to go take a shower. And she stopped
Wow.
crying, went upstairs and started taking a shower. And I'm running after her and saying, what do you mean they hurt us? Who's they? How many people? She said more than one. She doesn't even want to talk about it at this point. I
Wow.
said, how'd they hurt us? What'd they do? She said, all I can tell you is it went beyond terror. And she's off taking her shower. So I'm sitting on the commode and I'm asking her all these questions, which she's not answering while she's taking her shower. She gets out of the shower and she turns around to dry her legs off on the side of the tub. And her back is covered with whip marks,
Whoa.
red welts all across her back, probably 30, 40 marks. I said, Diana, what did you do to your back? She said, nothing. Why? I said, no, your back is covered in welts. She said, it is not. And she came over and looked over her shoulder by the sink at the little mirror. And she says, oh my God. So she called her therapist, and her therapist explained to her that it was a body memory. She said, take a picture of it. We'll talk about it next time you come in.
Wow.
So it was too bad that it happened, but it was also such a blessing because now it was no longer just my memories. It wasn't just me because I could be broken. I could be mistaken. I've always been screwed up my whole life. I've always had emotional problems. I've always been the problem child. I was the ugly duckling. I was the black sheep. So for me to have problems was not a surprise to anybody. But here's my innocent little sister who always flew under the radar. And now she's having memories. She's having body memories. She's having emotional memories.
Wow.
And she went on to share additional memories with me that she got over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And at the end of 3 or 4 weeks, her husband was very upset with the fact that we were talking about all this really gory, graphic bad stuff, and he felt like it wasn't good for her and it wasn't something that she should be doing. So she kind of promised him that she would drop it and let it go. And she's been able to have a very nice life for the most part. She's got 3 children and they've got children and they're all devout Christians. And she's still married to the same guy for like 55 years now. And so, that was probably the right decision for her to make. But I had this little window of time where she gave me memories that she was having. These weren't my memories now. So it wasn't me being screwed up. These are her memories, but they were just as graphic and abhorrent as the things I was getting. They weren't the same, and they lined up perfectly with satanic ritual abuse and the things
Wow.
they do.
Which was a gift.
So, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed because most people don't get that.
Right.
So I'm really blessed because you have a tendency to go into denial and say, this didn't really happen. I'm making this up. This couldn't have happened. My parents wouldn't have done that. It's part programming, I think, and part of it is just the good in us does not want to believe that this could happen.
Right. Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, I've been really blessed.
Absolutely. So, what was your Holocaust nightmare?
Okay, so this memory thing just keeps growing and growing. And so what started out as just an incest memory and then turned into a priest abuse memory and then turned into an SRA memory, and then turned into some mind control programming because some of the memories I got were definitely intentional, sophisticated programming. And now it's continuing to grow. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me?
Your Holocaust nightmares.
Yes, all my life, even though I was a Christian, I had believed I was reincarnated. And the reason I believed I was reincarnated, and I know it's not biblical, but I had very detailed graphic nightmares, night terrors, almost every night for my whole life. And it was always me as a concentration camp victim during the Holocaust. And it was different locations, it was different scenes. Sometimes it was medical experimentation, sometimes it was being raped, sometimes it was standing in line for the gas chamber, it was watching the smoke go up from other people being burned. It was graphic and detailed. And I felt like I could smell the smells, I could feel the heat, I could feel the starvation. I can remember laying in my bed thinking I was in a truck full of dead bodies. And if I breathed and they saw me breathe, then they would kill me. So I couldn't breathe. And I would hold my breath and try not to breathe. And since I was born in 1945, the end of the war, I decided that somehow I must be reincarnated and somebody from the Holocaust was one of my relatives, maybe, or somebody from the past. And that's why I had all these memories. I had died in the Holocaust once, and now I was reborn at the end of the war, and I still had all these memories. So I carried these memories with me all my life until I was in my sixth. And at that point, for some reason, I was having a conversation with my sister and I was telling her about how horrible these nightmares, night terrors are. And I just can't get rid of them. They never stop. And she said, well, that's because of what dad did. And I said, what? And she said, yeah, you know what dad did with the Holocaust. I said, what do you mean what dad did with the Holocaust? Well, my father evidently was fixated on the Holocaust and the experimentation, especially the medical experimentation that was done during the Holocaust. And so he had, for some reason, either programming as part of the cult or just out of his own mental illness, decided that it was the smart thing to do to take his children at the age of 12, 9, and 7 and sit them down and show them reel to reel tapes of the Holocaust and slideshows of the Holocaust and detailed descriptions of what happened from beginning to end, from being rousted out of your bed, by the Nazis coming in with their guns and dragging you out, and being in the train car that was so packed that you couldn't breathe, and getting to the concentration camp and being used for medical experimentation and drugged and raped and all this stuff. And as soon as she told me that, I never had another nightmare ever.
Wow.
But then I heard about Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip, my father was in the Army Air Corps. He served during World War II. In fact, when I was born on Lowry Air Force Base, and they actually extended his enlistment so that I could be born there because he was due to get out at the same time I was being born. Operation Paperclip is a horror story where at the end of World War II, the United States was 20 years behind Germany in aerospace technology and rocketry. And they were also very interested in Manchurian candidate mind control, how to create somebody that would do their bidding even against their own will and their own survival instincts. So at the end of the war, a group of people, not the president of the United States, it was behind his back and actually against his orders, but a group of people headed by the CIA brought the Nazi scientists into the United States because they wanted to upgrade our aerospace technology, our chemical warfare, and they didn't want Russia to get it. And Russia and the United States were allies during World War II. And these prisoners, German prisoners of war, Nazi war criminals, doctors, scientists, were going to go someplace. And the United States didn't want them going to Russia because Russia and the United States were not friends, even though they were allies during the war. They were still enemies, and the Cold War was going to start, and everybody knew it. And so we actually brought in thousands of Nazi scientists, German scientists, for the purpose of upgrading our aviation. And if you go to Huntsville, Alabama, you will see a rocket at every single entrance to the city of Huntsville because von Braun went to Huntsville, Alabama, and he was a German Nazi scientist. And he's the one that helped us escalate our rocket program so that we could be in space and on the moon. Some of these doctors went to a hospital military base in Maryland, and some of them went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Unfortunately, used, quote, volunteers from our military, from insane asylums. I have not been able to officially document, but I believe from cult activities, they got their people that they used as guinea pigs for these experiments. And there is a wonderful, it must have taken her years and years to write the book, but there's a wonderful book on Operation Paperclip, and it's virtually out of print. It's not real easy to get. It's The Secret Agenda by Linda Hunt. And just to give you an idea of what they were doing here, in short, experiments on our own soldiers at Edgewood, which was the Maryland uh, base, mirrored the horror stories that had unfolded in the dock at Nuremberg. Thousands of American soldiers, 7,000 of them between 1955 and 1975 alone, were used as unwitting guinea pigs in the test. They were gassed, maced, and drugged in the search for the ultimate mind control weapon. So she's got pictures of soldiers going into gas chambers, and they were drugged and they were used as guinea pigs. 7,000 of our soldiers. And of course, the VA denies all of this. But with the Freedom of Information Act, all of this has become available. And she had to get attorneys to get some of this information, but she has put together this book. So, why am I reading this book on Operation Paperclip? My dad was fascinated with the concentration camps and the doctors and what was going on there. So maybe it's completely independent and it has nothing to do, but I'm on a search to put this puzzle together, this jigsaw puzzle. And so I'm thinking that perhaps my father was either one of these guinea pigs that was used, and that sparked his interest in all this science garbage, or he was actually part of the CIA operation that was conducted on military base where they were using this to try and create the Manchurian candidate, try and create that person who would obey their orders, even at the expense of their life. So if that's true, then that's part of my story. So I'm on this research hunt
Yeah.
looking for information, and that's Operation Paperclip, kind of in a nutshell. It's much bigger than that and much more complex.
I appreciate that because we haven't brought that up on this channel. So that's fascinating.
You could probably do a whole hour just on that very
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah. We'll have to have you
But
back
there
and do
does
that.
appear to be a connection between ritual abuse and Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how has God helped you over the years?
In every way possible. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is my book, because my book talks about how he's helped me over the years and all the things he's done. And even when I did not believe in him, even when I was walking away and I was going in the opposite direction and I didn't want to hear about him and I was sick of him and I didn't think he was there. I didn't know whether God created man or man created God. And I didn't really give a rip, because if there was a God, he hadn't done anything for me lately. So I just was having this bad attitude. But there's people out there today that aren't as far along as I am. And maybe they're thinking they can't make it, but I want them to know that they can, that it's not over. The story isn't over yet. And God will work it for good, whether you see it or not, and he will be glorified in the end. So I'm not sure I would have chosen this path for myself, but this is the path God chose for me. And I don't think he would have chosen it for me if I wasn't able to go through it and glorify him. And that's what I'm counting on. So there's a little shop on Etsy where I bought this little disc, and it's just a little stainless steel disc with a 41 on it. And when you buy it, you get this delightful little saying. Let me get my glasses on again because I'm an old lady. And it says in the Bible, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Day 41 came and the rain stopped. Moses committed murder and hid in the desert for 40 years. Year 41 came and God called him to help rescue Israel. Moses went up on the mountain for 40 days. On day 41, he received the 10 Commandments. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Year 41, they walked into the promised land. Taunted Israel for 40 days. Day 41 came, and David slew him. Jonah preached a message of repentance to Nineveh for 40 days. On day 41, God stopped his plan to destroy them. Jesus fasted and was tempted 40 days. Day 41, and the devil fled. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciple 40 days. On day 41, he ascended into heaven. All this to say, don't quit. The rain will stop. The giant will fall, and you will enter your promised land. Don't give up at 40. Day 41 is coming.
Wow. That is so true. I love how she put all that together.
Yeah, it's really special. So I remind myself, don't give up.
Yeah. And we want to so often, but with God, we can get through this.
Absolutely.
Anita, this was delightful. Thank you for coming and sharing your story with us.
Well, you're welcome. It's my honor. I hope it blesses someone. I hope it lets someone know that they're not alone. I hope that it maybe helps someone heal.
I'm sure there's a lot of nuggets for a lot of people to hold on to. And that's what your story has, is a lot of nuggets. And
Well,
that's
thank
what
you.
we all need. And I hope that's what we get from everybody's story.
Yes.
There's always something we can glean and say, ooh, I need that.
Yes.
So thank you for being with us today.
You're so welcome, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners for always being here and for always being so supportive. And God bless you as you continue on your journey.
Only God could rescue me. Only God could set me free. Only God. Only God. Only God.